Hello and welcome to India Tonight. I'm Karan Thapar. After Monday's Bharat Bandh crippled economic activity virtually right through the country, we ask, how can we create mechanisms that resolve differences without leading to disruption, bandhs and hartals? In a real sense, this is the challenge that has been confronting our democracy for decades. But today, its urgency cannot be denied. With me, Planning Commission member and author of Discordant Democrats, 5 Steps to Consensus, Arun Maira, the President of Lok Satta, an organization committed to democratic change, Jayaprakash Narayan, and the well-known columnist and renowned for his innovative ideas, Surjit Bhalla. Arun Maira, in your book, Discordant Democrats, 5 Steps to Consensus, you write it's important in a democracy for differences to be brought to the surface and not suppressed. But then you add, they need to be resolved, they mustn't be allowed to develop into battle lines. Monday's Bandh is a classic example when differences became battle lines. How do we ensure this doesn't happen again?
I think there are 2 areas that need attention if you want to improve the quality and the effectiveness of democracy in India. As you rightly said, the democracy, the essence of it is that many voices must have the freedom to be heard. But that leads to then situations where you can't come to an agreement. And what's the decision that everyone would subscribe to? So there are 2 areas. One is that we tend to think of democracy as elections mainly, as a system of choosing those who are in the majority, the votes of the majority, and then giving them the power to take decisions, which then should apply to everybody, including the minority. And we know that the minorities are quite often not very happy with the majority ruling over them. So there's another aspect of democracy, which is the process of including various views, diverse views, the minority views also, in arriving at the decisions, even regardless that the majority is in the structure to rule, to do that. So I've been studying in the US, across the world, democracies, and here in India, what are the processes by which democracies arrive at consensus. Now that is a skill that we need to have in India very much. We are throwing up by very fair elections. We are very proud of the fact that we conduct the largest elections in the world pretty freely and fairly. But the people elected into the assemblies are not able to come to agreements, whether in parliament or in our state assemblies. Okay. We also have many forums outside these assemblies where people need to debate and come to decisions. So we need to have the skills for deliberations and decision making that are superior to the ones we currently have.
Pick up on that thought, Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan. Would you agree that one of the skills we lack is the capacity to build consensus between differing viewpoints? In other words, we see democracy in terms of elections, but not participation and consensus building.
Karan, I'm afraid it's a little bit deeper. The problem is more complicated. Actually, there is no real difference in terms of perceptions or understanding the problems. Because the party in power does one thing, the same party in opposition does another thing altogether. If there are genuine, irreconcilable differences, the problem is different. But right now, it is simply a make-believe thing. They are making the people believe that there are free lunches available. A democracy requires basically restraint, a sense of responsibility, reasoned public debate, and the capacity to indulge in some degree of self-denial in the short term. Now, once we make people believe that everything is possible in the short term, and the long-term consequences be damned, there is a problem. Take the recent Bharat Bandh, for instance. The circumstances related to that, I know we're not going to debate really the pricing of petroleum products. But the fact is, across the world, except in the United States, the motor spirit or petrol, the price is higher than in India, everywhere in the world. In fact, India has the 2nd lowest price in the world of petrol until now. And the highest price is, for instance, in a country like Germany, where it's $1.9 per litre, as opposed to India's basic price of about under $1 per
Quite right. Let's not go into the details of the pricing. I take the essential point you're making, which is that we need an honesty of attitude. Let me bring in at this point Surjit Bhalla. Add to that for me. Beyond honesty of attitude, do we also need a change in our attitude? I put it to you that we as people find it easier to identify differences rather than the common points with other people, and then to exacerbate them rather than ameliorate them? Do we need to change that attitude as well?
Well, I think, partly that, but there is a disjoint, and I think this disjoint has to do with the fact that India has had very rapid growth relative to its own past and in absolute terms for the last 20 to 30 years, and especially the last 10. And the disconnect that I see is that our polity, and especially our politicians, haven't kept pace with the changes that are taking place. So therefore, we still believe that age-old practices going back 100 years, which is a bandh, that is an effective way to protest in a democracy. If you look around the world, as the other speakers have said, basically people have found very different ways than a bandh in order to articulate their objections to government policy. And we, or at least our politicians, are caught in a time warp, and which, it actually reflects on us that we are the ones who elect them, but, the change is not there to be seen. Now, you asked for what are the channels by which people protest. Well, one of the most articulate ways in which people protest is through the media, whether it be the internet,
Can I stop you there? Before we come to talk about better ways of protesting than bandhs and hartals, let's just explore why it is that we are in, as you call it, a time warp, and why we tend towards bandhs and hartals rather than other better ways. Dr. Maira, to what extent does India's poverty and I suppose India's lack of widespread education militate against informed debate and instead encourage bandhs, hartals and street-wide protests?
The United States is supposed to be a far more educated society than ours and a much longer existent democracy. It's in a situation today where the divisions in the United States on very fundamental issues seem to be irreconcilable. You talk of education, well, we are worrying here about the petroleum prices. They've got a problem on health care. And they have for decades now not been able to come to a consensus on what should be done about their health care situation. Everyone agrees in the United States that it's broken, the health care is too expensive, it's not reaching everybody. Republicans agree, the Democrats agree. But they can't come to a solution, can't agree to a solution. It's the same situation. If the Republican says one thing, the Democrats will say the opposite, and they'll undo each other's things as they come into power. So that way it's not much different. I think what Surjit said is giving a clue here. There is a clue here. It is that unless you have an alternative which is effective, you will use the method that you have been used to so far. We were brought up through our independence movement to use the bandh and hartal, which was a genuine thing, because there it was not about, we couldn't have through elections overthrown the British government. We had to protest in some other fashion. Now that we have the elections, we should be able to use other methods for just making points between elections. We don't need to go to bandhs.
Let